let's talk about multiple representations of functions in context. So here we have a problem. Dulce and Vaman are on the way home from school. They track the trip home to the tables and graphs below. So the following tables and graphs are going to mark the distance from each of their own houses. Not from the same house, from each of their own separate houses. Okay, so Vaman recorded her distance from home with a graph, and Dulce recorded her distance from home with a table. Okay? We're going to use these different things to help us answer some questions over on the sideboard over here. All right, for this section, I highly recommend you pause right now, try to answer the questions, and then go back to the date from the data, and then go back here. Just check yourself. So, assume that you've gone through and tried the problems yourself. Let's go ahead and try it. All right, so V of 0, D of 0. What that's referring to is at time 0, these are referring to the distance that Vaman is from her house when she starts, and Dulce is from her house when she starts. So Dulce is 6 miles from her house when she starts to head home, and Vaman is 8 miles when she starts to head home. Okay? What does D of 60 mean in context? Equals 7. Very important you use units here, just like I did in the first part. This means after 60 minutes after Dulce left her house, she was 7 miles from her house. 7 miles. What about this question? When are Vaman and Dulce the same distance from each of their houses? How do you know? Well, if I'm looking at my table and my graph, if I had to take my table and plot the points on my graph, I'm really trying to examine distances from the houses and when they match up. Okay? So I noticed that at 60, for Vaman and Dulce, they're both the same distance from their houses. They're both 7 miles from their house. So I know after 60 minutes, they're 7 miles from their own respective houses. So 4, what happens for Vaman between 30 and 50 minutes after she left to go home? Well, between that time period, her graph looks like this. So I know her distance from home didn't change, which means she hasn't gotten any closer to home or any farther at home. Means she's probably stopped for about 20 minutes. What about this one, the domain and range? So there's multiple different ways we can write domain and range, remember. We just gotta make sure we pay attention to how we're writing it. So for domain, that's our time we're talking about. For Dulce to get home, it takes her about 120 minutes. So that's why we write it like this. Or we can write it like this. For range, we're talking about distance. What's the farthest she gets from home? What's the closest she gets to home? So for Dulce, it's between 0 and 8. And then it is between 0 and 8. I use multiple different notations, but they're equivalent to show us domain and range. This last question, what do you know about V of x? Well, I know that this is asking me to say, at what time is she negative 3 miles from her house? It's not possible for her to be negative 3 miles from her house. It doesn't work. So it is impossible in the context. You can't be a negative distance.